Hi guys, I'm live. I'd like to do some more bed rant. This is on a different topic than my last rant, and it's a pretty cool topic. I think one I haven't really totally dedicated a whole talk to. I want to talk about my musical influences growing up. Um, if you don't care about that, or if you're a hater, I got a novel idea. Don't watch this. There you go. But if you do, I want to talk about it. I've got a good memory. I remember music as I grew up. So let's do it. There was no music talent in my family but me. Um, uh, the first music I knew was two things, really. Um, Music I had to sing in school in third grade, which was second grade because I skipped second grade, in Colorado. And there was patriotic songs, anthems type stuff, just songs you'd sing to patriot, my country 'tis of thee and stuff like that. And I didn't really like that. In fact, I thought I didn't like music because of that. But music that I liked a little better than that, but not really in love with, was country music. That's what they had in Colorado. Country music and pop, like let me cover country music first. It was like you heard a lot of John Denver, I don't know what, Rocky Mountain High, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, Country Roads, all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't horrible to me. In fact, better than the stuff I had to sing in school, LOL. And that really was the first music that I had any affinity to in this whole world, in my whole life. And I thought about that when I did, just now, I just got through doing Flirting with Disaster by Molly Hatchet, which is almost a country song. You get that, right? And I kind of grabbed that from my earliest music thought, was basically, John Denver. And then second to that, but better also than the stuff I had to sing in school, was the Carpenters, We've Only Just Begun, I'm on top of the world looking, all that stuff. Not really great music to me, but she had a beautiful voice. I mean, still today, one of the best voices we probably ever had on this planet. Her and Freddie Mercury, maybe, I don't know, something like that. But great, voice. And that's all the music I knew when I lived in Colorado. My dad had Masonic stuff there. I almost Googled what is the state with the most Masonic lodges per square mile. I didn't, but I bet you Colorado might be number one. He had a lot of Masonic stuff going on there. But then in third grade, he started getting his Lockheed thing, and he had to come because Lockheed was in California. Burbank is where he actually went to work. And I wasn't going to say this ever, but here's a cool fun fact. Brandy Rhodes, who was born 10 years to the day before me, grew up in Burbank. And that's what my dad's work was at Lockheed in Burbank. Okay, a big deal. Wow, that's what a coincidence. But it's something. He drove to work to Burbank every single day. Once we moved to California, I was like 8 years old, and still never heard of rock and roll ever. All I heard was like the Carpenters, John Denver, and school anthems, school songs. I had never heard of rock and roll. I didn't even know it existed. But I had that much interest in music, but phooey on it. Who cares? But when I was 9, not 8, but 9, my cousin, I'll just say her first name, Kathy. You guys want to figure out who she is, but I'm not telling her. That's all I'm revealing right now. Kathy with a K had 3 8-tracks when I was 9 years old. It was when I was in 4th grade. And they were Aerosmith, the first self-titled album, 1973. Peter Frampton Comes Alive, live in Anaheim or wherever it was. That was 1974. 5, 6, something like that. And then Best of BTO, 1975 or 6 also. And that's when I just fell in love with music. I just loved it in that order. I loved Aerosmith the best, then I loved Peter Frampton the best, and then lastly, Bachman Turner Overdrive. I practically ruined those 8 tracks listening to them so much, and then I had a friend that lived up Kathy Street, a friend of mine, and he would come home from school because they had all year round school where they lived, but where I lived with my parents, we didn't. We had summer vacation, so we didn't have all year round school. We had summer vacation as our vacation. So my friend would be in school when I wouldn't be. So he'd get home from school, and it's time to go play with him or whatever. And I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay and listen to the music. I mean, I already didn't care about friends that much. And even at 9 years old, I was like, oh, dude, he's here. I gotta go hang out with him. I just want to stay there in Kathy's room listening to the 8 tracks. That's really what I wanted to do. And the way Peter Frampton could just own that crowd. It wasn't so much the music, even though it was great, but I liked Aerosmith a little better. But just the way he could just command that audience. He could have had them all jump off a cliff and they'd have said, how high, great. And I didn't quite say at that moment, that's what I want to do, but the thought was put in my head. What if I could do that someday? Peter Frampton, and so then there's that. And then there's my pre-guitar bands I listened to before I played guitar, but after 4th grade. And my main one was Rush. I started listening to Rush in 8th grade. So, a few years after, the 8 tracks, Kathy's 8 tracks. And in 8th grade, I heard The Spirit of Radio by Rush, Our Permanent Waves, and I was completely floored. I almost liked Rush as well as everything else put together. Like I almost would have said, just give me Rush, even if you have to take everything else away. I would have lived, in 8th grade. If you just had Rush as the only band on the planet, I still would have survived. That's how much I loved Rush. I just loved Rush, man. I had every Rush album. My dad made me work for my allowance. It's a funny word to say, work around me, right? I had to mow the lawns, water the yards, and weed every single Saturday for my allowance. And with that allowance, I bought my CDs, not CDs at the time, but records. And they didn't have records. At first, it was 8 tracks and records. And then by the time the 80s came around, like Rush, it was cassettes. Cassette tapes were out by then. And I had every Rush album. Rush, 1974. Fly By Night, 1975. Crest of Steel, 1970. Fly By Night, yes. Fly By Night, 1975. Crest of Steel, also 1975. 2112, 1976. Farewell to Kings, 1977. Hemispheres, 1978. And Farewell and Permanent Waves, 1980. I don't think I missed any. I'm going back with my memory here. That was that. I had every single Rush album. And plus all the other bands that were out. What else did I like? I hadn't even heard of Van Halen in 1980. Can you believe that? I had not even heard of Van Halen. I heard about 1980 though. I heard them, like in 8th grade. So they'd already been out 2 years. They'd already been out since 1978, and I hadn't even heard of them until like after I was into Rush, like because and then the Van Halen song that first came out that I heard. I heard a bunch, but I liked. They were playing "When the Cradle Will Rock" because that was off of "Women and Children First," which came out in 1980, and just all the rock bands, and then I picked up a guitar at 15. That was when I was in between my sophomore and junior years in high school, and the first thing I learned was blues. Just hell with it. Just that's where I get my blues and rock sensibility. We didn't do country, we didn't do heavy metal, we didn't do classical, we didn't do jazz, we did blues. and as it applies to rock and roll. And that's where I got my blues foundation. And then all the other bands that came out and all that, blah, blah, blah. But genetically, I'm 99.9% Northwest European. So I have a classical kind of thread to my genetics. I have affinity to Bach and Mozart. If you ask me to jam in a major scale, I can do it. You know, if you ask me to do like a Mozart style jam, I can do it. Or a Bach harmonic minor thing, I can do that. I can kind of do country because I grew up with John Denver. I can kind of do blues because I started that with guitar. I can kind of do heavy metal because by the time I'd been playing guitar a year or so, I'd heard of all the bands. You know, there was Judas Priest, there was Def Leppard, you know, there was AC/DC, Van Halen, of course, Randy Rhoads, Ozzy Osbourne. Heavy metal is all around, you know, and heavy metal is very classical influenced, and I have that genetically in my genetics. So I have no problem doing, like Randy Rhoads was very cool to me. Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen. Eddie's more of the bluesy thing and the improvisation, and Randy was the more classical and composition. You know, Randy would do more classical stuff and he would compose his solos. And Eddie would kind of do more bluesy stuff and would improvise his solos. And I kind of had a bent to both those formats. I could do both. I went toward Eddie though, because that was more bluesy. It was more rock and roll. It was more improv. I didn't do Randy until, you know, I quit college. I really got into Randy in 1987. Well, let me go on. Let me finish the story before I go that far. So then I go to college, 1984. I was 17 years old. And by then, my guitar teacher had showed me Al Di Meola and Alan Holdsworth, and I kind of rejected. First, I liked Al Di Meola, but then I rejected him and took to Alan Holdsworth. Got all into him. I've learned every solo. No, you can't say that. But I've learned a lot of Alan Holdsworth solos in my time. Learned and forgotten, of course. As Alan Holdsworth said, he did too, and stole the punchline of my joke. That was in 2003 when I met him in San Diego concert. But because of Alan Holdsworth and not weird jazz stuff, because I took a jazz at my music store. I took jazz workshop and rock workshop, but the jazz workshop I liked better, believe it or not. I got into John Coltrane and I got into Charlie Parker. For a summer, I learned a jazz solo every day for like a whole summer. That's pretty a lot. You know, a lot of jazz solos I learned. Thelonious Monk. I don't know, McCoy Tyner, Eric Dolphy, Pharoah Sanders, Chicago Art Ensemble, Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, Oscar Peterson, called him Prez. And Charlie Parker they called Bird, and Dizzy Gillespie they called Diz, and then Oscar Peterson they called Prez. I did the jazz thing. Kind of got it out of my system though. I did it enough to not want to do it anymore. Kind of like when you're a kid and you like fudge until you eat so much of it you don't like it anymore the rest of your life. Or you're a kid and you swim in the water every day of your life, and you grow up and you don't even like to. You barely get in the water at all. It hurts to take showers almost, but I do. Got jazz out of my system though is what happened. And then when I quit college in 1987, I just reverted back, but not totally back to Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix, of course. Yeah, of course, Jimi Hendrix, bluesy thing. More Hendrix than Clapton. Never would have got into Clapton. It was always Hendrix as far as blues. But when I quit college, I got the tribute album. Came out, Randy Rhoads, Ozzy Osbourne tribute. Found out I was 10 years to the day apart from Randy Rhoads' birthday and mine. And I just got so into tribute. That's all I did for like 10, 15 years was Randy. I mean, he was just my guy from like 1987 into the mid 90s. So I did Randy, you know, I loved his Suicide Solution cadenza. Of course, along the way, I learned, I liked Dawkins in the later 80s. um, Extreme, Living Color, Warrant, Winger, White Lion, Skid Row, Poison. Not so much Guns N' Roses. They didn't really thrill me that much. Slash looked cool, but he couldn't play to me. Sorry. And you know, the whole ilk. Whitesnake, White Lion, White Lion, not White Lion. Just all of them, you know, Skid Row. And then I just gradually developed. After that, I learned alternate picking in 1985, and just now I have all those different influences I just mentioned to draw on. Oh, and when I got into weird jazz stuff, I even got into weird classical music. Like I listened to atonal classical music, like Olivier Mendelssohn. I listened to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. I listened to Arnold Schoenberg. I listened to Igor Stravinsky. I listened to Claude Debussy. I listened to John Cage. I listened to, and I didn't rehearse any of this, and I'm not looking at anything. When I look like that, I'm just trying to look in my mind, like my mind's eye, like I'm looking at a part of my head, my mind, but it's not literally anything. I'm actually literally reading with my physical eyes. It helps me feel like I'm looking at it in my mind's eye. I got into like classical stuff, you know, dissonant stuff. You know, Bela Bartok, Xenoxis. It starts with X. A really weird name, but really weird music, and just really weirded out for my college years, like in the mid '80s, until I just got sick of all that, dropped it all, and back to Randy in 1987. So anyway, that was my story with my music background. So if you guys have any suggestions, or if you like something I do and you wonder where to get that from, or if you like it and you'd like to suggest I do more of that, I'm just giving you my background so you know that I've touched on a lot of different, having my fingers in a lot of musical pies. I've had a lot of different stuff thrown at me. I just wanted to go over this. So I love you guys. Peace, love, and rock and roll.